Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Fertility Confidence podcast. If you are watching this on YouTube, it might look a little different. We are finally moving away from my computer desk and into the vision of my office that I always thought about when we built this house, although still a few little things to do in here for sure. If you're obviously listening to this on the podcast, you can't see where I am or how different it looks. It doesn't even look that different. I'm just closer to the pink wall, really. And I'm a lot more comfortable sitting on my lovely new couch with my new little setup. So today I sat here thinking, what are we going to talk about this week? And I always sift through what questions have my clients been asking me a lot of, what am I seeing in my Instagram DMs a lot, like what seems to be the theme of things. And there's two big themes. So we'll do maybe one this week, one next week. The two themes that we had a good giggle today, because I'm recording this on a Monday. Mondays are our team meeting days. So I meet with our whole team and we were laughing because I honestly feel like everybody has a UTI right now. We have had to help clients, both clients in the fertility realm and clients who are pregnant, navigate UTIs, multiple UTIs, chronic, recurring, what have you. And I was laughing because I was like, isn't it so funny that it is also now the first day of spring, right? It's the spring equinox today. And I'm like 99% sure that the TCM organ of spring is kidney. So all of these women are just like all of a sudden exhibiting all of this like kidney like origin issues, these UTI issues. So it's just humorous when you start to see like pockets of similarities in your clients. So maybe we need to talk about UTIs and the fertility realm. But today we're actually going to go down a self-care journey route because I keep having this conversation with clients over and over and over again, but not just with my clients. I'm actually having this conversation with myself. I'm having this conversation with practitioners that I'm mentoring, with business mentorship clients that I have. Like I keep having this recurrent theme and similar to the UTIs, which, is not something I'm dealing with, thank goodness. But I also find when I have recurring conversations with clients, with friends, with practitioners, it's always because it is a conversation that I need to apparently keep hearing over and over and over again. So let's talk a little bit about self-care. I had an appointment with a client last week, secondary infertility client who has a toddler at home, okay? And we were talking a lot about how she just hasn't felt like she's had the capacity to take care of herself, which makes a lot of sense. And regardless if you're in the secondary infertility realm or not, there are a lot of potential roadblocks to self-care. And so the first thing I want to really dive into a little bit is, what does self-care actually even mean? Right? What self-care is to me is probably something, completely different than what it actually might be for you, for that client A, client B, client C, client D. So I've always taken the approach in my private practice to not give self-care prescriptions. I want you to do X, Y, Z on these days. I want you to do blah, blah, blah here and there and everywhere, because the reality is what feels good for me might not feel good for you. So I want you to really take a second and sit down with yourself and maybe sit down with your journal. This would be like an amazing journal question, an amazing prompt of what does self-care actually mean to me? For a really long time, I personally struggled with this whole concept of self-care. Okay, when I hit my low-level burnout in 2020, all I was hearing from friends and from other practitioners was, Kelsey, you need to take better care of yourself. What are you doing for self-care? How can we integrate more self-care into your routine? And whenever I heard the word self-care, I immediately thought of, taking hours every morning and having this elaborate morning routine that sure would probably feel great, But was it realistic to me? No. And because it didn't feel obtainable, I just had this like brick wall in front of me kind of saying like, that's not possible for me. And I was getting in my own way, right? Because I had this vision of what self-care should have been. And truthfully, when I really analyzed this for myself, the vision was what my self-care probably was when I was 21, right? When I was living on my own, when I didn't have kids, when I didn't have my company or a practice, like life looked a hell of a lot different back then. It's the same with movement. And I think we've talked about this a little bit before, where I had this block up thinking, I don't have the capacity to exercise because my brain was saying, if you can't get to the gym for at least 1 to 2 hours, like what's the point? So when we start reestablishing this connection of what does self-care look like, we figure out what we need in this moment. So I want you to take a second, and if you want to do it right now, if you have the capacity to do it right now, hit pause, journal for a hot minute about what does self-care look like for you, or you can come back to this, okay? Then the second thing I want you to do is really get into the feeling, the journey, and the consistency of saying to yourself, what do I need in this moment? So when I decided that self-care did not have to be this construct that fits in this box, and every morning I take the exact same box off the shelf and it's my self-care box, and I open it up and I'm like, okay, and I go through step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6, step 7. And at the end, I'm going to have the most perfectly regulated nervous system. I'm going to feel fantastic. And I'm like ready for my day, right? Once I decided that that's not actually what self-care looked like to me, that I'm not someone who actually does well with a very rigid, structured routine, that having that actually added more stress and anxiety into my life, that's when I started saying, well, what can I do? What does feel good to me? What is self-care for me? And for me, that's one simple question. It's, what does my body need in this moment? So for me, I don't have this rigid, structured morning routine. And we talk a lot about this with our clients of like, don't feel like when you are, this is the example I give because truthfully, this is the trap that I fall into. So I don't do a lot of like, I'm not on TikTok. I think I'm maybe the only, I am, but like, I don't actually scroll TikTok. I'm probably the only 30 something out there that doesn't. But I will scroll through Instagram Reels, which is the same damn thing, mostly to figure out from like a business perspective, what audio is trending. Can I do something with that? But I get sucked into the vortex, right? I get sucked into the vortex of Instagram Reels, and you see all these beautiful curated reels, and I'm sure you see them on TikToks. They're probably on both, of these women who like get up and make themselves a matcha, and then they go for a walk, and then they journal, and then they do yoga, and then they clean up, and then they have a beautiful nutrient dense breakfast, and then they get ready for their day. And the whole time I'm sitting there going like, how on earth do you do that every day? And that's not a knock on them. Like, bow down to you. And if that feels like self-care for you and you have the capacity to have a structured, long, rigid routine, please prioritize that, because it's self-care. It is literally about you. It is not about anyone else. But if you see that and it makes you feel bad about yourself, and if you start to feel guilt that that's actually not how you treat yourself in the morning, let's take that guilt and be constructive with it. First, let's release it. My mornings don't look like that because truthfully, that's not realistic for me right now. Okay, cool. Maybe when I'm 50 and I'm an empty nester and like things look a little bit different with how my company runs, and like my kids are off at university or college, or they're working, or who knows, wherever they've planned to spend their lives, maybe my mornings will look like that. In fact, actually, sidebar, we had a it was Sunday morning. The kids spent the night at their grandparents. So Sunday morning, we did get up and kind of just be like, what do I need in this moment? And I, enjoyed sitting, and I had my decaf espresso, and then I went and did yoga and sat in front of my red light and like tidied up. Like it was a nice slow morning. But the reality is that like that felt great, but it doesn't have to look like that every single day to be self-care. That's kind of what I'm trying to get across right now. How can I regulate my nervous system even on the days where I don't have 2 hours in the morning to myself? Where can I build small pockets of time in through the day? And these are things I really want you to start thinking about when you are struggling with self-care. It's like building that 2-week weight survival kit, that mindset toolkit we've talked about a few times. And you can scroll back to previous episodes if you haven't heard me talk about that before. But some days you might have an hour. Okay, so let me go back for a second. In the mornings, I'm like, okay, what does my body need in this moment? I try really hard to give myself about 60 minutes between my kids being out the door and me having to be at my desk. Do I end up at my desk earlier some days? Yes, I do, unfortunately. Do I end up at my desk later some days? Not the days where I have appointments, obviously. Sure. But I try to leave myself at least 60 minutes. Some days I don't have that. Some days I have 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Some days I have 60 minutes, but I unfortunately have to have a shower. So that's most of my self-care time. But how can I make that just a little bit more self-care-y, okay? I put on some music. I have fun. Like I dance around the bathroom. I don't actually do that, but I think about it in my head, right? Like I sing. I don't check my phone. I don't check my Slack. I don't check my emails. Sure, it's basic hygienic needs, which I think is a whole topic for another time about how that truly isn't self-care for women, especially mothers. That's just taking care of your basic hygienic needs. But when you only have a certain pocket of time, how can we like bouge that up a little bit? Okay. So what does self-care mean like for you? Can you start asking yourself the question, what do I need in this moment? Can we release this notion that we have to have these long, complicated, drawn out morning or evening routines in order for us to check that self-care box? I am trying so hard to abolish this notion in my own head and hopefully in the heads of my clients that self-care should not be a box that we check off on our to-do list. It shouldn't. It should be something that we inherently do throughout the day to regulate our nervous system. Our nervous system is so incredibly important for so many aspects of our health, but definitely our fertility. When our cortisol is dysregulated, our sex hormones are impacted, our insulin is impacted, our inflammation cytokines increase, we're creating more reactive oxygen species, our mitochondria and our ovarian health is impacted. I was just reading about mitochondria, so like all these crazy things are popping into my head. Our circulation, our sleep, we're starting to make poor eating choices. Like I literally could go on and on and on. Like our nervous system is right up there with uterine health when we're talking about fertility. So when we hear the word self-care, let's first and foremost actually define what that looks like for us. Let's then release the notion of we need to have this copious amount of time to make it happen. Let's release the notion that self-care should be a checkbox on our to-do list. Taking care and prioritizing our own basic needs is not self-care. Okay? It's taking care of our own basic needs. But are there instances where we can like give our nervous system a little bit more? Can we bring in some more fun, some more play into our lives? Can we anchor in and enjoy the moment instead of just going through the motions robotically? Sometimes that's self-care, being present. Like it can be that simple. So I felt like I was having this conversation with a lot of women around how they didn't have the time to do the things that they used to do. They didn't have the time to go to the gym anymore. They didn't have the time to, do the meditation that they liked to do, where they're actually, like 30 minutes and they didn't have the time to like just take the time. So I want us to release this idea that it needs to look the same that it did 10 years ago, because your life might look different now, and that's okay. But that doesn't mean that we can't still find ways to give back, to feed, and to nourish our nervous system. And I'm actually not going to sit here and give you like a laundry list of ideas, because I actually really do want you to take the time to journal this out and really lean into this idea of like, what does this mean for you? And then if you're into it, you can share that with me on Instagram so that we can see it and we can cheer each other on. But even if you take the time today to just sit down with your journal and really define that for yourself and really process through maybe some of the like garbage concepts around that you have. I think self-care has just become so trendy that now we feel like we have to lean into all of these crazy trends in order for it to actually be self-care, when the reality is that doing something you love, or connecting with a friend, or prioritizing something that you haven't been prioritizing, like that could be it for you. And that's fine. And it's so incredibly important, especially in a time where you might feel like you're just losing a little piece of yourself a little bit, right? Which is what's very common during the fertility experience. So share with me what your self-care is going to look like for the next little bit as we enter wonderful spring here, and I will see you guys in the next one.